Hi, and welcome to our THWACK Camp session, People Do Dumb Things. Why Security is Hard for IT Pros. I'm Destiny Bertucci, SolarWinds Head Geek. This session will focus on security needs and concerns within different areas of your organizations. Joining me today are Paul Guido, Mandy Hubbard, and Sandy Hawk. Thank you guys for joining us. Why don't we introduce ourselves?
Hi, I'm Paul Guido. I'm radio teacher on THWACK. I work at a regional bank in the South Texas area. I've been there for 20 years. I started out as a system administrator, but for the last few years, my focus has been on security.
Hi, I'm Mandy Hubbard. Thanks for having me today. I have been leading software quality efforts for companies across different industries for about 20 years, and recently got into DevOps once I realized that I could influence quality by shifting the focus earlier in the cycle and with deployment processes and so forth. So I guess I'm representing the developers on the panel.
Hi, I'm Sandy Hawk. It's lovely to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation. I've been in the cybersecurity industry for 20 years, back when no one even knew what it was. And I've been in a lot of different roles for a lot of different organizations, but most recently I'm helping companies help to tell their own story about cybersecurity out to the world.
So the main thing that we're wanting to focus on today is there's different security realms within all of us, right? And so we want to focus on, how do we get these conversations started? So I wanted to start today with how do we help guide good people to not make the security mistakes?
That's a great question. One of the ways I've been trying to work with people in my industry, in the security and the financial industry, is trying to get a better dialogue with our end users. The end users just want to get their job done. They go out and they find these new apps and new type of technology to try and use to try and get their job done. And they might not be thinking about policies and security of those apps that they're using. It's so much easier just to go to the App Store and download something and run it. It's another thing of what is the implications of that for your policies and your company.
So yeah, I think if you make security easy to do as a natural part of their workflow, they're going to do it because they want to do the right thing. The challenge is to have them understand that they're part of the solution, and I think the carrot works better than the stick. Yes. So if you show them the right way to do it and show them how that's in their best interest, I think that's one good place to start.
Definitely, but I think we're in a transition period where people have been doing things a certain way for a long time, and initially adding security layers, it's going to make their job harder. They've got muscle memory, they've been doing it this way for so long, and there's going to be a period where we have to retrain people to do those things until it feels comfortable.
And also I think about why there are certain policies and why they're actually in their best interest.
Right, instead of just dictating this, if they understand why they shouldn't click that link in the email or why they should change their password every 30 days, then they're more likely to do it than if it's just a rule.
True, and I mean, you have to make things much more personal for them as well. You want to not just say, this is wrong because it's in our policies that it's wrong. You have to go, think about if your child was doing that, or if your mother was doing that, and people might take advantage of them, or take advantage of the data or the information that they have in that application without thinking about the security concerns about that.
Definitely, and I like the way that you're talking about how you're relating it, like if it was the child or if it was the parent, things that were coming across there, because how do we help to bridge that communication gap? I mean, because it's not just, in our personal lives, it's within the company. There is a communication gap there. So how do you guys feel that we should kind of bridge that?
Well, I think, take it on a case-by-case basis as much as possible. So think about what are the threats and risks for each type of function or responsibility inside an organization. So if you make everyone a security steward and make it real for them, that's the best way to learn. Experience is always the best way to learn. So a real simple example is, for the receptionist, what's really important for that person is to make sure that they're watching that no one's piggybacking on an authorized employee that comes through the room. So that person really does want to do their job, and technology can be used to sort of support that person's job, but at the same time, make it real for them, make it part of their experience, and I think that also helps to bridge that gap.
I agree, and I think just being approachable so that when people have questions about security, or if there's a policy that they know it's there but they don't understand why, to have that conversation so that they can come to you and say, why can we not piggyback? Well, these are the implications of that. Right. But having the conversations means being approachable, and there are no dumb questions.
Right.
We don't expect them to already know and understand, and if they want to discuss the reasons, then they can come and speak with us, and we can talk them through that.
Yeah, and traditionally, IT security has been the place of no.
Yeah.
And my colleagues and I, we're doing our best to change that. We'll say yes, but you really need these controls in place. Or yes, but you need to make sure you understand all the risks involved. So that's a trend that started a few years ago. It's still continuing on. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people that still have the mindset that we are the people of no.
Right, and the way that you're saying that, when you talk about controls, I understand what controls is, because I obviously, security is kind of like in my blood here. But who understands what a control is? I try to relate it, such as like a door lock, right? That's a form of a control, but how do we convey these terminology terms, right? Like to different levels of the users within?
That's a difficult thing, and it's really, like you're saying, on a case-by-case basis. You can equate things of physical control, a door lock, absolutely, an administrative control, a policy or a guideline, and so, or a technical control, a firewall, or a configuration, or some type of web filtering product. Those are the three major groups of security controls out there. And once again, you have to kind of make it real for the end user, for the person that's doing the work, that we need to make sure that they understand what we have in place to protect things and what we might need to put in place down the road.
Yeah, and not get so worried about the buzzwords,
yes,
and instead tell stories. That's sort of my realm. I'm a marketer, so I like to tell stories. I think people remember stories. And so if you kind of use your security awareness training program, and I don't know if we have a question about that, but if you make that around telling stories, people will get pulled in, they'll relate to it, it'll become real for them. And when they're in this scenario or situation where you want them to think about good security, it'll be a natural thing, because they'll remember that story, and it'll become real for them.
I like that you gave the analogy of the door lock, because you're putting it in terms that they understand. Anything that you can explain with in relation to a cell phone, because everyone has one.
Yeah.
They enter a passcode to get in, and then they enter a second passcode to get into the bank. They understand the asset they're protecting is their money. So if you can relate to, well, we have this control in place and then this secondary control in place to protect our assets, they don't really have to understand what we're protecting if you can relate it to, well, you know how you have two different levels of security just to get into your bank account on your phone. It's the same idea here. We're putting layers in place to protect, our assets.
Definitely, and a lot of the times what we're trying to protect, especially in today's world, is personally identifiable information, right? So do you feel, when we're talking about terminology, do people even understand the value that they hold with their PII information, or do you think it's something that they just don't understand, and why is it important to protect this?
I think that, first of all, they don't understand which pieces of their information are personally identifiable, which pieces are actually pieces of information that they don't want leaked. I think your name, your phone, maybe not your phone number, because we don't have phone books anymore, but your name and your address is pretty much public information. But when you get into your social security number, people know. They know that's something they don't want to give out. But it's those pieces of information that can be used to identify you in all of these security challenges. You see all these quizzes where people give out their mother's maiden name and the street they grew up on and their first concert, and they just put it out there for anyone. And those are all pieces of information that we use to act as a secondary control of security to protect our data. So I think that people, they know their social security number is not to be given out. They know their bank accounts aren't to be given out. Some people think their name and address are private, which I don't really agree with, but they don't think about the street they grew up on, their mother's maiden name, their dog's name. Those are the things that really concern me.
And also what people can do with those breadcrumbs of information about you. I think getting back to the why is really helpful. With this information, they could pretend they're you.
Exactly.
And when they pretend they're you, these are some bad things that can happen. So I think, again, bringing it to the real perspective.
Looking more and more into OSINT, which is the investigative part of doing recon on a person or a company.
Do you mean open source intelligence?
Yeah, exactly, open source intelligence. Trying to get rid of the buzzwords. Is just one of the foundational things that people do when they're trying to attack or go after somebody. And that's kind of the things I'm looking at. Is you're talking about phone numbers. There's been a recent case where someone stole a bunch of Bitcoin from a number of people that had a lot of money in Bitcoin and other currencies, cryptocurrencies, because they cloned their phone to a phone that bad actor had and took over their number and used that text message as a second factor. NIST deprecated texting as a second factor a couple of years ago, and that's why a lot of the security professionals are having people lean on like Google Authenticator, one-time time-based passwords, and my favorite is like the hardware tokens, the YubiKeys out there, and other hardware second factors, because that's a lot harder to beat.
Or dual control,
Yes.
a piece of information from two separate individuals that only they possess, in terms of like rotating keys and things like that. A lot of times we implement security policies where it takes two engineers to rotate the prod keys and that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Of course, that's at a company level, and we are talking about how to help regular people understand security.
So when we were talking before, you'd mentioned that you have heard of and seen some different types of phishing that's trying to get around different authentications. Absolutely.
There's a number of people that have self-service out there and using identity management like Duo and Okta and some of those companies out there. We're seeing that people are sending password reset or password requests or requests for access. And I'm hearing about this on all the podcasts and stuff. They're trying to get into that company, and they're trying to use the identity management against them. So you have to be savvy. You have to be thinking about this person, is that actually the person doing that? Does all the details match up properly? So keep your eyes open from a security realm, not just the end users, but the people that are vetting the requests out there make a big difference.
That's something that, like you were talking about earlier, when we talk about phishing and things like that happen out there, when it happens on the personal level by clicking the wrong emails or not noticing that when it comes from a company, it's not actually in the domain name, right? And you're like, wait, Yahoo's trying to ask me something that's coming across here. But how do we help everybody within a company say, okay, look, I need to have steps in place. I need to verify before I click things. How would you guys address that?
I think it, again, comes from the top down. I think it really does. It's a cultural thing to have people understand to be a little more paranoid than they might have been in the past, to kind of have a detective or kind of a sort of like thinking like an FBI officer, for example, like, is this really who I think it is? So slowing down your workflow, if that's possible. I know it's really kind of impossible these days, but if you just take a moment and think before you click. I know that sounds really basic. And just be really like very, not paranoid, but I guess questioning and quizzical about whatever you're getting. If something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. The early phishing attacks, like 10 years ago, were really so easy to see through. They used poorly written English, or the logo was totally wrong. Yeah. Now they've become really sophisticated. I mean, some of the tools out there, like there's ransomware as a service now. So there's a whole underground economy where they're very sophisticated in their tools. So I think we have to really step up our defenses. And I know it sounds horrible to just tell people to be paranoid. I don't know what else we can do.
And some of those things are easier for the user to do if they're on their desktop. So if they're on their desktop, they can do like the mouse hover thing to see where the URL is. They can see maybe more of the person's address that comes through from the email address. But if you're on your cell phone, you have a very small window in the world. You're not doing any hovering. And so it's hard to tell exactly where that email came from. Emails are so easily spoofed. There are a lot of third-party companies out there now that will take over some of the interaction that the end user has. They might replace all of the links with links that are verified. So they'll sandbox all the links. When you click on them, they get sandboxed going to those end users. The other piece is they validate that if it says it's somebody at the company and they're spoofing somebody at the company, they'll say this is spoofed. they'll give you some indication that that's a problem. Of course, there's always the catching the actual, the emails that are supposed to be going to those people, but that can be worked with. You just have to work with your IT department or your providers. Google does a great job when it comes for Gmail and G Suite, keeping that stuff cleaned up coming inbound.
And the two-factor authentication is a great
Absolutely.
tool and thing to enable. I think most all the platforms now have that option. So that's
Yep.
Well, you raised a good point. You said we teach them to be paranoid, and unfortunately, that's what we have to do. I think most people assume that people are inherently good. And not that we want to change that, but you need to assume that an email with links, it may be phishing. Or ask yourself, did I ask for something from my bank? Have I made a request? Have I initiated something that would cause this vendor to send me this email with a link? No, I didn't do that. Did I reset my password? Did I ask to reset my password? No. I think that people just blindly click on links, and they also feel like they have to because the emails come through and they sound so urgent. One of the things I've seen in companies I've worked with in the past is actual documentation about phishing that was dispersed. And when IT sees something going around, they alert proactively. This is going around. It looks like it comes from Citibank. It's asking for this. If you see it in your inbox, don't click it. So they kind of stay ahead of the curve, and they know what's out there, so they can tell you specifically what to look for, so that you don't click it. And then there's just education disseminated everywhere, and then explaining what could happen if you click that. Well, you go to a site that's not your bank, and they ask you for information, and you give that to someone who's not trustworthy, explaining what's going to happen if they click the link. But we are very click happy when we get an email with links.
Oh, it's so true.
Yep.
It's so true.
Especially if it's someone who's disguised as like a trusted supplier or partner. So if you open that email and you think, well, that's weird, I just talked to him on the phone. He didn't tell me he was going to send this invoice.
Yes.
So it's encouraging our users to think, you know what, that's weird. If it's weird, wait, pause, and call your IT department.
Or if it seems urgent or there's a problem with your credit card. And you immediately panic and you click the link. So I think we do have to take a minute, slow down, and think it through. Unfortunately, that's hard for most of us.
And that's social engineering, right? Like they're preying on your behaviors of which that they need to come across there for.
And they look for specific timing things. I mean, right after Amazon Prime Day, you're going to get those emails saying your package is held up, or there's a problem with your package. And there might be a lot of people waiting for packages that day. Oh, I need to click on that. I got to get my whatever thing I bought at Amazon Prime.
And that's very true. And in today's world, like you said, like even with Amazon and things that are just wrenching on you. But what I find and I've talked to other individuals is after vacations. I mean, like when you have those out of the box emails that are coming on and they know when you're returning, then there's things, and then you come into a flood of emails, and then you're click happy because you've got to get through the day, right?
Well, and there's a possibility you might want to not do any out of office emails in the future, because what some of the bad guys are doing is they're realizing that you're out of office, Sandy. So what I'm going to do is act like Sandy, and now that you're on vacation, I'm going to send out messages to try and get Mandy to do something else and act like Sandy. And Sandy's not going to get the message. She's on vacation.
That is exactly right. And with that, and as we're talking about these things that come through there's so many data breaches that have been in the news, and it's becoming mainstream. And you were saying, before people didn't even know what cybersecurity was, right? And now it's on everybody's tongue, and it's in the back of the head, right? So with all these data breaches that are coming out there, do you think people are starting to be numb to the situation? Is it old news now? Is it just like, it's a bump in the road?
I have, I think, a unique perspective in some ways because I've been doing it for so long. So I'm just thrilled that people know what it is now. So I tend to not think we're numb to it, especially based on the calls I get from my mom, asking me about all kinds of things she opened in her email. Is it safe to do this? Is it safe to run that program? She only started doing this since it was front page news. The hacking is now the way that politics is done, which is really kind of scary. So I feel like people are kind of waking up. There's more transparency about it. There's more litigation around it. There's board level discussions now that never were before, when at least especially in the mid-90s when I started. So I feel kind of optimistic about it, but I don't know if you feel the same way.
I kind of have a different perspective. I think the more something happens, the more mainstream it becomes, the less shocking it is. We had the Equifax breach, and everyone was freaked out that there was this breach, and then unless they were personally affected in the time frame between now and then I got a letter from another Frost bank that my data had been compromised. If you're a regular person and you saw the first breach that was big news and that was a big deal, but nobody's taken my identity, no one's impersonated me. Okay, it's not a good thing, but it didn't personally affect me. Now there's another one. Well, these things happen all the time, and I haven't been personally impacted by it. It's now becoming commonplace. It's not unique. You're hearing about them regularly, and no one has actually felt the impact of their data being stolen yet. So I think that people are just, well, there's another one. It's just inevitable. It's just happening, but it doesn't really affect me.
Well, all of it kind of adds up to more and more breadcrumbs for bad guys to take action on.
It does.
I'm hoping that we can do more in the future to try and secure things by default and make it very difficult for people to expose data. It really is going to take a lot of work by a lot of security professionals, from DevOps, from people from the C-level, all kind of coming together to try and get a better handle on the data that they have, the data that they have that they really don't need. They need to go cull that out, and also the data that they might be hoarding that they need to get clean up and trim down. The less data you have, the easier it is going to be to protect.
That's true, and when you're talking about, these situations and them kind of being vanillaed now, right? Like it's just like becoming the norm that's out there. But that's also reminds me of if you have your house broken into, that fear, that gut-wrenching, oh my gosh, now I need a security system, now I need things, because then you understand it, right? Yeah. And it's real to you because something has happened. Sure. And I wonder, do you feel like people, because we were discussing this earlier, Sandy, that when those breaches happen, we don't even know the effects yet.
Right.
Once they have the information, they have it. It may be 10 years from now. So you may not be feeling that yet, but it could hit you at some time. So how do we tell that story? That's kind of where you're at, and I feel like you have a way to try to help this.
Yeah, one great resource for us who are trying to raise the alarm is Brian Krebs's blog, where he's been doing this forever, but he basically tells all the stories of the underground economy, the dark web. How much does why does a medical record cost so much more to be traded on the dark web than, say, a social security number? And you would think social security number, I'm always told that that's the most thing I need. Actually, it's only $1 per record, wow. Apparently, according to Brian Krebs. Yeah. But medical records, depending on how detailed they are, could be $1,000 per record. Wow. Yeah. So if you steal, not you, but if one steals 1 million records from a database at a healthcare company, EMR or EHR records, multiply that times 1,000. So there's a lot of incentive for the bad guy to do the bad work. Absolutely. And I think the more we kind of surface these things that Brian Krebs has been so wonderful in doing, the more we tell these stories, I think the more people will realize, oh my gosh, you mean my information about all my surgeries that I've had for the last 20 years, someone owns that, some bad guy knows that about me? It makes you, the emotional part is so important as you bring up. You feel really violated, but at the same time, you think twice about who you do business with and ask questions of your medical provider.
Right, and you can get a new new credit card number pretty easily. Social security number, that's not so easy, but sure. It can get happening down the road. It's possible, but you can't change your medical information. You can. Yeah, that time you broke your arm or whatever, that's the time you broke your arm. And if they have your blood type in there and all the other details and stuff, it makes it very difficult, very difficult.
So something that I want users to kind of understand, because that's actually the medical part of it is near and dear to my heart, because with the amount of healthcare cost of which that it is. The importance of why those records are so important is because if I've had several surgeries, if say a insurance company had that information, then they would think that I would be at a higher risk, right? So that helps the intelligent risk side of their company. But what it also helps that, and the dark web and where it comes into convenience mode is, what if I need insurance now and you have great insurance and I am having a terminally illness? I can now buy that information and use your identity. And I am able to gather this information to come up there. So the value in the records, but people don't think of that. So elderly people, the young, like kids, I mean, when you're a mom and something is wrong, that's an area where you might struggle on the moral code of, should I venture towards this or not? So that's really a great reason to bring that one up there. And with mobile phones, like we were talking about, I mean, there's just ransomware as a service. I mean, those are all things that people exploit very easily across. And I don't think when you're in an organization, people understand that emotional hit that actually comes across.
Sure.
I really like your example because it's more than just getting access to your bank account and your money. It's getting access to personal information and affecting the way a company might interact with you in the future or might do business with you in the future, and there are ways to exploit you or even just market to you in a different way because now they understand vulnerabilities and needs in a way they didn't before. I don't think the regular person thinks past the financial implication.
Definitely, and the social media aspect. So when we talk about security is hard for IT pros, right? Because with the mobiles and phones and with the social media avenues that are out there, it was just publicized as well that insurance companies are actually scanning the Facebook and your social media information, and they are blunt about it. They don't care. It's public information if it's not private. So they're analyzing photos. They're analyzing were you hiking today? So how do you guys feel about that? I mean, is that like a sense of is that a company issue at that point?
I think it needs to be handled by Congress, to be honest with you. I think there needs to be a law that protects our data privacy. Europe did it, so why can't we do it here? I think following the GDPR mandate and encouraging companies, companies that are based here are global anyway. Right. So they probably have to be compliant with those new data privacy requirements. So why don't we just take a page from the book in Europe and do the same here? That's what I'd like to see at least.
Yeah, not only do I tweet stuff about SolarWinds and other things going on around here, but I also tweet about whiskey. So, of course, it's very good whiskey that I'm tweeting about. So hopefully that kind of rates me a little higher in the insurance realm and stuff. But it's not like I drink very much. But occasionally I like to have a drink. But I want to have some very good whiskey.
And with the AI and the machine learning things that are out there, those algorithms that are actually searching through, they're looking for keywords and they're going across.
I'm sure that's going to kick in.
Yeah, definitely. So when we're discussing those, and I love how you were referencing with the GDPR. Do we feel would that help? Because my biggest worry is with organizations, even if you're a big company, if I was to be on the bad side of things, I don't think I would go after the big company. I would usually use the smaller companies that have a niche or a hook in for financial reasons, or even on the healthcare side, it would be collection agencies, mom and pop, they have a hook in. So how do you think that we're able to help relay, if you are a big company, to the people that are attached to you, a security concern? Is there a communication that you think that we should do? Or
I know in the industry more and more vetting is going on with companies that are associated with companies. Ever since the Target breach and the HVAC system trying to do better with making sure that they're not wasting electricity. That was great, but of course it also helped make that breach possible. Since then, I know a number of companies that have gone through and started looking at those third-party agreements and go back and look at those third-party companies to make sure that they're having minimum standards. And then the other thing that companies are doing is they're trying to put more controls in place for those third-party companies when they do come in to take a look at something, that they have a very, very small view and access to different pieces and parts, only what they need to talk to.
Definitely. But if it was at the congressional level, I feel like maybe, would you think that would be a good template? Like, is that a policy-based regulation that would help different companies?
I don't know if it would help in that regard, but it might help in regard with privacy.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking about it more from a consumer, my own citizen sort of point of view than for a company. So I think it's really important for the private sector and the public sector to come together with solutions that actually make sense in the real world. And so hopefully those conversations are happening.
Well, one thing that happened in 1985, there was a law that was passed that basically said anything that was online on a server that's over 180 days old is like the trash that you leave on your street. And so that pretty much everyone knows if you put something in the trash in the street, the police can go and without a search warrant and look through that trash. They can do the same thing for data that's over 180 days old on a server. So they need a warrant for anything current or new, but they just need a request for anything over 180 days. And that law, to say the least, in 1985 meant something completely different than this day and age that we live today.
Well, that kind of goes back to what you're saying about, culling your data.
You get rid of the old stuff.
Data.
Quit hoarding.
Yes, and also touching on asking about policy, I think that's actually potentially going to place a hardship on smaller companies, unfortunately, at least initially. But they do need to have these practices in place, but it is going to make it harder for them to compete with the companies that have the resources to implement all of those policies.
I'm wondering if they could take the approach that PCI does, which I realize is not a law, it's more of a contractual mandate, but they have, increasingly more stringent controls depending on the volume of transactions you have. So if there could be some sort of mitigating protection against that so it doesn't hit we don't want to put anyone out of business, especially small businesses. Yeah, but at the same time, a big data breach could put them out of business. So it's sort of weighing those two things together.
But it's also hand in hand. It's the small companies that work with the larger companies, but it's also the larger companies that they work with to make sure they have the appropriate controls in place.
So we all need to look out for each other.
Absolutely.
We need to question your security practices as well as my own.
Yep. Definitely. So within your guys' respective fields, if there was one thing or like an area of a topic that you could say to organizations about security, what do you think that you would do, or what was your tip or trick be, or something in that realm of like, how would you help an organization?
I think, I mentioned before about coming from the top down. I think security is everyone's responsibility. And when you have a management team that really lives and breathes that principle and doesn't want to make exceptions to make things easier, like, oh, why do I need to use the VPN when I'm coming in from home, or whatever it is, right? Yeah. As long as the CEO at the top really considers it a high priority and also at the same time has a feeling of trust. There needs to be a culture of trust. And to let everyone know that you're all part of the solution, that there's no sort of ill intent here. I mean, of course, you're going to find insider threats all the time. But I think if I was a CEO of a company and I care about security, I would just let everyone know that they can be part of the solution. And that if you do make a mistake, don't hide it. Tell us. Yes. So when you have that culture of trust, everyone wants to do the right thing. And when they do make mistakes, they come clean. They don't try to sort of hide under the rug, which is, lack of transparency is a huge problem in security. True. And so I think the more you can build that trust and transparency, the more it'll trickle down through the ranks. But I'd love to hear your perspective too, because you're on the front lines. Yeah,
training is really important for security, regardless of C-level or DevOps or the people that are just doing the day-in-day work at the organization. The more training they have, the less problems that they have generally, the more things they can see and recognize as an opportunity to bring tighter security in. That would probably be one of the best pieces, is just have people trained for the latest, because I guarantee you the attackers out there have the latest tool sets and the latest training on how to attack you. So we really need to kind of tighten it all up so there's this culture from the top down that we can all get the training we need to make sure we can stay secure. And it's not just the security guys. That's nice about many organizations out there, that it is pervasive. Everybody thinks about that. Other organizations I've seen, not so much.
So coming from DevOps, I have a little bit different perspective because I'm in the business of building and deploying software. So I'm thinking about how to build and deploy that software in a way that doesn't expose risk for data breaches. So I'm thinking about talking about security early on at the design level before we deploy. How are we creating our infrastructure? What is our password policy and that sort of thing, instead of tacking it on at the end. And I've worked for companies in the past that did a security scan right before we shipped and opened defects on all the vulnerabilities. And these are just, packages that need to be updated, unnecessary ports that were open. Yep. And that was the extent of security. But we need to be looking at the design and thinking about how we're designing our applications and how we intend to deploy our applications. And we also have to look at third-party software that we use. I think that could be a whole separate topic, so I don't want to get into that too much.
Supply chain.
But in terms of vetting each other, it's kind of like with companies vetting each other. When you use third-party libraries, you have to vet those third parties as well, and you have to look at who else is using those. Are they people that I respect, that I have that have a good reputation for being secure and implementing good policies? Is it something that someone wrote that has only a few people using it? That's when it really comes into play, is what other pieces of software am I including, and when am I looking at security? Because the longer you wait, just like with any problem in software, the longer you wait to look at it and address it, the more expensive it becomes. And we need to start thinking about building secure applications instead of going back and securing existing applications.
Right.
I definitely agree with you, and we've talked about this before, the fabric, right? Like we need to make sure that we blend security in there so that way it's not an afterthought. It's not a 2.0, right? Yeah. Like that's something that we need to think about. When we're discussing some of the ways that you go into the security, like you were talking, how do we actually frame, like with the developers, to make sure that security is in line? Is it the security policy that you would implement and then give to her, and then say, like, have the users give feedback? Is it more training needed? Because I feel like there's a lack of understanding of why how we can get that fabric within there.
I think the developers themselves should understand the current security risk and how to build secure applications. Right. Again, it shouldn't be a policy that someone tells you have to build it this way. They should have the training and the understanding, so as they're looking at solutions and looking at approaches, they're always thinking about security while they're designing and building the software. Everyone needs to be involved and everyone needs to be security minded, and obviously that needs to be part of the QA cycle, that we're looking for vulnerabilities and things such as that. And I don't feel like that's happening right now.
Yeah,
and a lot of the companies I've worked for.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you look at the OWASP Top 10 that they just re-released a few months ago, I think 7 of the 10 of them are programmer flaws. Mm-hmm. The programmers they didn't have the security training, or they didn't understand that these were and they're still pervasive. I mean, some of these things haven't changed since the last time they did it, which I think was 2012 or whatever. But for years, some of these things have carried through. And as a security professional and not a programmer, it frustrates me because I'm like, I know these are problems, and you need to get the people to fix these things.
There's a translation here. You understand security, and I understand how to build software. Yeah. But what is what you're saying? How does that apply to how I'm building my software? That's the part we have to blend and figure out.
Absolutely.
So I think, one wonderful thing about developers is they care so much about the functionality and performance of their application. Mm-hmm. They want to write code that is just like, so how about if we taught them how to write secure code? In addition to fast code and efficient code and streamlined code, how about we teach them how to write secure code? Because I think if you positioned it that way for a developer, they would really latch on to that because they want to write good code.
And value that in the organization, so that's one of the things. They know they're going to get accolades or what have you for writing performant code, but maybe that's not one of the things that we value. And unfortunately, secure code it's just secure. There's nothing to talk about. For format code, there's
unless
something
they
visible.
do a vuln scan afterwards and it doesn't have any exposures and they get a prize for that.
So we need a way to recognize that.
Yeah, and
I like
incentivize
that.
it.
And that's the deal. Part of the incentive for doing it is less rework.
Yeah, that's a great incentive for a developer.
So you don't find out later on that there's a problem. You find out there's a problem right then and there when you're doing your test code to test your code. That's part of the whole DevOps mindset. And a lot of people that are doing DevOps, they took all this is really quick. We can really pull out and make lots of changes and do pushes all the time and keep innovating. Then they quit reading to the part where it said, oh, and by the way, we need to make sure that when we're testing it, we also test for these common problems that are out there. And so I think that's going to happen more in the future. I really do. I've got a good feeling that I think the word is getting out, and they're understanding that security training is better code training.
That's true.
And is also part of it how like 80%, maybe I have the stat wrong, but 80% of code is actually repurposed? Repurposed like unpatched libraries or other things that, binaries that maybe were written 20 years ago or 10 years ago that still have some gaping holes? I don't know. I
don't know. I would say that I can see it being possible.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right. So it's actually not the developer's fault. It's the library that they're calling or the binary that they're calling.
There's been a number of flaws that have been found in some code out there that have been available for 20, 25 years because once again that code was written and so they come and find out and fix it. There's also, you just look at Spectre and Meltdown type of vulnerabilities that are out there and branch prediction issues and speculative execution issues within the hardware itself. Those things have been around for a long time, but what they do it? Performance. And it makes it a much better performing experience for the people using those processors. But it does leave some problems. And a couple of people for years have had this itch that there's something wrong with this. And finally, with the research coming out, there's a lot of things that they need to do better. And they're only finding more. I think the harder they dig into the hardware, they're going to find even deeper problems.
So Sandy, it sounds like what you're saying is in addition to writing secure software, we have to evaluate existing software that's potentially been running for many years that we don't look at.
Yeah, and there's this trend towards microservices too, and using APIs to call those different microservices together. And so, I think I've done some work with a company that was researching this, and they noticed that while most developers are like, oh, they're really small apps, they're going to be great, they can't have any vulnerabilities, and they found actually there are more vulnerabilities per line of code in a microservices app than there are in traditional apps.
Really?
Yeah, they're easier to fix because they're not monolithic and hard to sort of pull apart.
You fix that one problem.
Exactly.
Well, they have to be accessible by different services, so they have to obviously open up more entry points. Then a monolithic application can have a single point of entry that's well protected, but a microservice has an API that needs to be called by different applications, and perhaps they need different levels of security, and maybe they don't think about that.
Yeah, right. I think most developers are focusing on that one piece of the puzzle.
They are.
And perhaps if there's someone that's sort of looking over the overarching, like how is this going to look once it's in prod?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and a lot of times, I come from I build up the systems and the server and the web server, and you have the 3-tier app kind of world, and you take care of those and you nurture them and you keep them around for years. That's not DevOps. DevOps is you destroy it and just build it new often. So it's not like you have to take care of it and nurture it. It's like, hey, we've got new code. Shoot that one and roll in the new one. And that's a completely different mindset to try and secure too. It's going to be interesting for the future.
You think because of the fast cycles, we tend to release more quickly?
Well, no, if let's say some attacker got inside this stuff and you did a rollout and you blew away all the old containers, they're gone.
Right, so that's a positive for...
And I'm sure the attacker's like, hey, I had a foothold on that, but oh man, it's gone.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about the security and things that are coming through there, I guess for me, it's the convenience, right, that opens up gaps. Like as you create things that are easier to do, sometimes there's more ports and things which that get kind of left behind. I mean, is convenience something that we can
Yeah, it's great that you bring that up because I feel passionately that we need to marry convenience with security. So, I'll give you one example in technology is single sign-on tools. So SSO tools make it easy to be authenticated properly and make sure that you're only gaining the access you need. You sign on once on your little dashboard and you're in. You don't have to re-put your password in. So that, I think, is a great innovation. And when we think about convenience, there's other things beyond passwords. There's the convenience of shadow IT. Why is shadow IT happening? Because it's really easy to do. So if we try to think not of the no, security shouldn't be synonymous with no. Right. How do we innovate security so it's synonymous with convenience? That way we're like more than halfway there.
And that's a great thought. And do you guys have any final thoughts?
I was thinking the convenience, though, actually also opens a security breach because now you've got a single entry into everything. I only have to remember one password. I can follow policy and reset it. But if someone gets that password, they now have access to all the systems I'm authenticated on. So it's kind of a trade-off.
But at the same time, you have a single, I don't know if Paul, you're going to say this.
It really depends on how that was configured originally and how it's set up.
Sure.
So for example, let's say you leave the company. If we kill one account,
True.
It's killed across the board and you can't get into any of the resources, whether they're cloud-based or local-based, depending on if it's how the connection is built between the identity management system.
Right, sure.
So SAML, that's easy, that's just gone. So things that are done with that security markup language. So, but it really, it depends. The other thing is, depending on the identity management type software that you use, they have some stuff on the front end that looks to try and figure out, are you really who you say you are? Are you logging in today from Austin, but in 20 minutes you're logging in from South Africa?
Oh, yeah.
So it can have that kind of user behavior analysis built into it. So some of that stuff's been mitigated in some of the products, not all of them.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the bad guys, they have equated innovation with convenience. I mentioned the ransomware as a service. That's exactly it, right? So they're innovating, thinking in terms of convenience. We should, on the good guy side, on the defensive side, let's think about how we can make security more convenient and easy to do.
I would like to thank all of you for joining me today and helping to spread security awareness. For THWACK Camp, I'm Destiny Bertucci. Thanks for watching.